everybody, and welcome to today's webinar about mobilizing your community to achieve big climate goals. I'm delighted you could join us. I'm Kathy Kuntz with Cool Choices. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Cool Choices is a Wisconsin-based nonprofit. Our quest is to inspire businesses, whole communities, to adopt sustainable practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we're kind of right in the middle of this quest around big climate goals. And this is an exciting time to be in the middle of this quest. We've got all kinds of communities across the United States committing to ambitious climate initiatives. You've got the communities who've signed on to the Sierra Club 100, committing to 100% clean energy community-wide. More than 100 communities have signed on to that now. Also got the millions of people who are in states, counties, cities, school districts, faith communities, businesses that have committed to, we are still in, essentially committing to the Paris Climate Accords. So you've got kind of a variety of ways that people are making these really big, ambitious, public, super important that it's public because we see through public commitments much more often than we see through private commitments, but we've got entities really committing to make deep and substantial changes around their emissions. And that's a really exciting first step, but it's only the first step. So while it can seem daunting and even exhausting to get that commitment through, what I really want to talk about today is what comes after the commitment, how you get from a commitment around 100% clean energy to getting it done. And I want to kind of talk about all of the pieces, but I want to start you with kind of two big overarching themes to this. And the first is that as you think about doing this thing that's going to be really hard, a key strategy is going to be that you get some accomplishments out the gate, that you show some early successes that can empower people and excite people to be part of this. So really, as you're thinking about kind of those first initiatives, there might be something your community's already largely done that you can showcase as a success on this path, but you really want to think about what are going to be some things we can frame as wins out the gate that help mobilize people forward. So that's the first kind of piece of how to think about this broadly. And the other thing I want you to really think about is the long-term versus the short-term, because when your community commits that it's going to be zero emissions by 2045 or 100% clean energy by 2050, that's only 31 years from now. And some things that happen in your community last more than 31 years. A house that's built this year will last 60 years. A commercial building in your community might last 75 to 100 years. So you've really got to be thinking about how does this happen over the long term? Well, a lot of your efforts are going to be focused on what you can do to mobilize and get people moving right now. You've also got to keep this piece in mind about, okay, how really limited the time is overall, and the fact that you're only going to get one kick at certain opportunities. And we'll circle back to this a little bit later, but I think there's a tension there that you want to kind of keep in your head as you're thinking about how to implement a plan here. When you're thinking about the plan, of course, where you're starting is really with if our goal is zero emissions, how big are our emissions right now? What are the pieces of this? And this is national data, but essentially for every community, those emissions are going to fall into 4 buckets. Power, electricity. So part of your quest is going to be to make your electricity clean, to make it not emit carbon, to make it come from clean sources. Folks are defining clean in different ways, and I'm not going to put myself in that argument right now, but typically that's renewable energy. Sometimes it includes nuclear energy. Sometimes it includes fossil fuels if you can capture the carbon. There's lots of ways to think about that, but that's the electric piece. And then there's everything tied to transportation, light duty vehicles, cars and trucks people are driving, heavy duty vehicles, buses, planes, all of that. Buildings, that's both homes and commercial buildings, and then industry, the manufacturing. And so the power includes the electricity that happens in industry and buildings. You want to kind of think about that way. What buildings here represents is the heating and water heating in buildings that's coming from natural gas or fuel oil or propane or some other fossil fuel source. Ditto for industry. That's the natural gas and other fuels that are happening there. Fundamentally, the strategy, most folks agree, is that you've got to electrify transportation, industry, and buildings. So you've got to transform all of these emissions into electric emissions, and then clean up those electric emissions, make that 100% clean energy to get to zero emissions. And so that's your quest, is to how do we take all these pieces in our community and make them emission free. The other thing I will say here, so I spent probably 20 years in traditional energy efficiency before now spending more than a decade in sustainability more broadly. And as you look at this, I can tell you with absolute certainty that in each of these categories, there's probably at least 20% waste that you can eliminate, that you don't have to convert to another fuel. And so really fundamental, when we talk about this, we tend to talk about electrification and cleaning up the electricity, but the fundamental first step is, of course, reducing waste, eliminating waste, reducing energy usage, because that makes all the other pieces more simple. And I think I'm confident saying there's 20% across all of these categories. With transportation, I'd argue it's probably closer to a third as the opportunity to eliminate waste. There's just, in my experience at Cool Choices, the opportunities to reduce usage around transportation are just unbelievable, partly because we haven't historically focused on it as much as we have on the power sector or buildings and industry. So essentially what you've got to do is figure out how your pieces are going to reduce, and that's going to be different in every community to some extent, because the specifics of your community are different. You might be a suburban community where most of the homes in your community were built after 1970, after we had building codes. That's a really different place to confront some of these challenges than a small community where most of the homes are more than 100 years old. Okay, so there's some differences there. I think the other thing to say about kind of figuring out the path is that realistically, you can chart a pretty concrete path for the next 5 to 7 years, and then you're going to need to reassess probably in 5 years what that path is and chart the path for the next 5 years. You're not going to be able to spell out exactly how this works all 30 years to 2050. That's not realistic, and I think trying to do that creates more pressure than you need at this moment. What you're doing is hard enough, so you need a clear path to begin with, and then some milestones past that. And I think the way to think about that when you're talking to the community and the bigger constituency on this is really probably setting some interim goals or milestones. Our quest is to reduce our emissions 100% by 2045, then by some point, we're going to have reduced them 75%. Some other point, maybe it's 30%, but giving yourself some clear milestones across the whole, and those become a much easier thing to talk to people about. You know, there's a ton of complexity in what we're talking about here, and mostly that complexity needs to live inside a small group of folks leading the effort at the community, and other people should just get to see some easier math that shows them that things are moving forward. Okay, everybody doesn't need to understand KBTUs or tons of carbon or any of that. And so try to be really judicious about how can we frame this so that everybody gets we're on a quest and this is how far we are on our quest. As you're thinking about those interim goals, one of the things that lots of communities do, and it makes a lot of sense, is to start first with city operations, to clean up your own emissions out the gate here, and then focus on the broader community. And this makes sense from a couple of perspectives. First, it's the piece you have the most control over, your city leaders. But it's also a way to walk the talk and kind of live the example you want to be in the community. We do a fair amount of work with folks at community scale, and one of the things that we see a lot is people are really cynical about waste in city government. Of course, there's plenty of talk about this in various kind of political circles, and people will have really concrete examples. I drove by City Hall last night and all the lights were on, kind of thing. And so thinking about how those city operations can be an example for the community of where you want to go is really important. It's also an opportunity to show what's possible, particularly with new technologies. So I think about things like, I love when local libraries install solar electric systems on the library, because that's a really accessible solar electric system that businesses in the community, that residents in the community can see. They can learn more about what it's producing, how much it's reducing bills. There's a way that when you implement technology in city facilities and are transparent about how those technologies are working for you, you can accelerate adoption in the private community because you remove some risks for them. You're letting them know that oh, this worked for us. If a PV system on the library generates 4,000 kilowatt hours a year, it's likely that a similarly sized system on my house would do a similarly sized thing from 3 blocks from the library. You know, it's giving people some certainty around the things that feel new or experimental in this. And that's really important. People need certainty. Kind of to my next point about signals. So I'm going to pick on my friends in Illinois for a moment because this was just such a striking example. So in January, the governor of Illinois signed a commitment that Illinois is going to meet the Paris Climate Agreement. They're all in on reducing their emissions at least 80% by 2050. This week, Illinois legislators are floating a proposal to institute a $1,000 vehicle charge for electric vehicles. And of course, that means that there's all kinds of flutter about, you know, is Illinois encouraging vehicles? Are they discouraging vehicles? And I was struck in this moment that it was this important opportunity for the governor, and I haven't seen him do this, maybe he did it and I missed it, to very clearly state, well, I would oppose anything that discourages purchases of EVs. We're committed to this big goal to reduce our emissions. EVs are clearly going to be part of achieving that goal. We don't want to discourage people. The silence around that, and maybe he's got other strategies there, but it's sending the wrong message to consumers. It's first we said we cared about these things. Now we're not sure we care about these things, and it's really hard for regular folks to see what their role in this is for sending the mixed signals. And I recognize the governor cannot control what legislators do, but he can respond to it in strong and clear ways. And it kind of takes me to my next point. I always appreciate Stephen Covey in the kind of 7 Habits of Effective People. I think it's the second thing. It's begin with the end in mind. And that's essentially what I'm saying you need to do when you're thinking about these big climate goals. You want to be zero emissions by 2050, then that's a frame that you need to look through for everything you do between now and then. It's not different than any other kind of a journey. If we were headed from New York to Miami and I said, hey, let's take a slight detour, let's stop off in Minneapolis, that's a little bit crazy. You need to be focused on, wait, we're headed to Miami. This is the way to Miami. And kind of in that light, thinking about things like I talked a little bit before about new buildings. So the new buildings that are going up in your community now are definitely going to be there in 2050. And are you building them to help you achieve your 2050 goals or to make it harder to achieve those goals? And a couple of maybe really concrete things here. So I am always startled when I hear someone say about a new building, well, it was built to code. Let's all remember that building code is the least efficient structure that you can legally build. It is a floor, it is not a ceiling. Okay? This is the minimum that is legally allowable. So if you are a community that intends to have no emissions by a date certain, seems like you would want to encourage both commercial and residential facilities that are built much better than code, that are much more energy efficient, that integrate new technologies, etc. Because, as I mentioned before, we know that ultimately we need to make buildings all electric, that heating and space heating need to convert to electricity. It makes sense to be encouraging that in new buildings. Why put in boiler systems if we're going to need to take them out? Again, boilers often last upwards of 50 years. It's a crazy thing to put into a building if you know you want to be zero emissions 30 years from now. And even so, in some cases, it might not be practical to put EV charging or a solar system on the building now, but there should be wiring to accommodate that so that it's easier to put on later. This is especially true if you're thinking about like multifamily buildings, parking lots there, but also residential garages. The wiring to enable an EV charging station to be put in later is trivial in the construction process. But if you do it later, you're talking about a significant cost. You know, it's maybe 10% of the cost to be doing these things up front. This is a little bit of wire. So that's the building piece of this. And similar things apply when you think about things like streets and infrastructure. If by 2050 you want a substantial portion of your population to be walking and biking instead of driving in single occupancy vehicles, then it makes sense to be looking really critically at bike lanes and sidewalks when you're doing street projects starting now, because you aren't going to want to redo all those streets. And similar things happen even to the parking lot. You're putting in a new parking lot, let's lay the wires underneath so that charging stations can be easily added later. Let's think critically about how much parking we need, given where we're headed on this. So again, kind of beginning with the end in mind. What do we want this vision to be in the long term, and how are we going to facilitate short-term discussions to get there? as you're doing all of that, it becomes really important also to have this clear path to the vision so that everyone can see what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And again, it's I would say it's clear without being specific. So your quest is to reduce energy usage across all facilities by 45% as part of this, perhaps. And there are very specific things that you're laying out for the next 5 years, and then there'll be another set of specific things after that. Part of that keeping to a smaller list is about keeping it simple so that folks know where they fit in and they know what they can do. If you give people a list of 150 ways they could help you reduce emissions, they're going to just put the list in the recycling bin. It's too much. It's just overwhelming. What all the studies tell us is 3 to 5 things is what I can absorb. And it's important that you're clear that there are some things I could do. I think one of the things I'm seeing in some communities that gives me pause is the initial focus on local government is just to focus on local government. And I see folks in communities kind of assuming that, oh, this 100% goal is just going to be a thing that city staff do. We don't have to worry about that. They're just going to get it done for all of us. I think it's really important that from the beginning, you talk about how everyone has a role in this. Everyone will be part of this solution. Everyone has a role to play. And one of the ways you can do that from the beginning is to recognize the leaders in the private community who are already doing things that contribute to your emission reduction. So this might be a local business that has done a major energy retrofit and dropped their energy usage. It might be a homeowner who's installed a solar electric system at their house or drives an electric vehicle. It might be here in my community, one of the businesses I'd showcase is a local pizza delivery place that uses an electric vehicle to deliver pizzas. Okay, they're helping us be on our path to 100%. And showcasing those leaders, we've talked about this lots of times in webinars, is an opportunity to highlight what people are doing right and thereby inspire others to do similar things. And that's a really important momentum building thing. I'll give you a concrete example of this that I like. This is from Fitchburg, a community just south of Madison, and their sustainability lead put together this website where she showcases all the cool things that are going on in Fitchburg. So you can highlight a thing and read a little description of it. This includes things businesses are doing, the community is doing. It's really a great piece of kind of that momentum building and showing what people are doing, which is getting more people to do more things. Another important strategy here is leveraging, and there are 2 halves to this. Funding. As a community that's leading on these things, you have a unique opportunity to talk about how your community's leadership can benefit other communities. That's an appealing story to think about with a variety of funding sources that could help you move forward. And there's also ways to leverage expertise that are really important to think about. And the experts that I really want to encourage you to explore are local university experts. Very often through engineering programs, planning programs, even I know professors in marketing and sociology that invite community projects that students can work on to get real world experience with change, with figuring out engineering problems. And that's an opportunity for you to leverage expertise and get new insights into what you're doing, while also creating additional dialogue about what you're doing. Because fundamentally, a really important part of this is to talk about what's going on. Talk, talk, talk. All the time, you want to be talking about this vision you have, this quest the community is on, and how things fit into that. Oh, this business wants to do a major renovation. That's an exciting opportunity for them to help us move closer to our quest. Think about all the ways you talk about this. And similarly, you want to be giving people a really simple way to monitor progress toward the goals. How are we doing so far? Where are we at? And again, I said earlier, I think you want to boil this down to something pretty simple. Folks do not want to be in all the details that you're in about how this quest is going, but what's the bottom line? How close are we to where we want to be? As part of that, there should be some regular moment where leaders are reporting what results are. And again, I want leaders reporting results, but I also want random celebrations of local leadership that happen all the time in the community. And most important there, I want you to really celebrate the wins. Okay, this is this thing that, we tend to go, oh, we accomplished this, but we still have this and this to do, and this wasn't as good as it could have been, and just stop it. A win is a win. And this is the hardest quest you will ever undertake. Celebrate the wins. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate the wins. It's really important. Could say that like 900 times. I very deliberately found this picture where these children have sheer joy. Neither of them are going, oh, but there's this other thing that we haven't yet accomplished. We need you to help us celebrate the wins so that we can see this enormous challenge through. Super important. Okay, I beat that horse enough. Just in closing, there are some additional resources on our website about this. I'm going to chat the link to that. I just put in the chat box. Look at that. I could do two things at once. That's pretty exciting. Again, there's a whole webinar series about getting people excited about change, and then some other thoughts consistent with these. I'm going to open it up for questions, knowing that I'm really, this webinar ran a little longer, so I'm totally at my 30 minutes. But if folks have questions, I'm glad to answer those before we go. How to engage business. So engaging business, the thing I would say here is the key is to be focusing on providing that positive reinforcement of what people are doing and how they're helping. That's really compelling to businesses. And I think the system is going to cut us off. Maybe not. It's just going to go over. It's okay. Other questions? Sorry, I thought our system might ask. Oh, back to my point about buildings. So yes, here in Wisconsin, communities aren't allowed to set their own codes. How do you encourage building above code when you can't require it? So again, I think there's a ton of opportunity here to recognize people who are leading, to frame up, this is what we want, this is where our community is headed, this is how you can help. I think the more you get that information to the residents who are going to buy those homes, or to businesses who are going to inhabit those buildings, the more likely it is that you can encourage folks to create facilities that are going to better fit your needs in the long term, which means being much better than code, 20 or 30% better than code at least. I'm not seeing more questions, and since we're a little bit over, I'm going to end things there. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you've got more questions, shoot me an email. And thanks for all you're doing to help communities get to 100%. It's incredibly important work, and we all appreciate it. Have a great day.